I worked at a hospital where the mental health facility was separate from the main building. To get there, you had to walk down a hill from the main structure. The outbuilding was housed and had 2 floors. The upper level was for staff offices, and the lower level was for patients. The patient area was divided into 2 sections, Section A and Section B. Section A was for those with severe mental illnesses, while Section B was for milder cases, including people who had attempted suicide. Every time I was assigned to work down there, I was sent to Section A. The first part of the daily routine involved picking up keys from the security guards. Every door in the facility had to stay closed and locked to prevent patients from escaping. If you needed to leave a room and a patient was blocking the door, or close enough that they might slip out with you, you had to find another way around or wait until they moved. This happened to me a few times, but it was never a huge issue. The second thing that made working there challenging was how we cleaned the rooms. We had to wheel our housekeeping cart into the doorway to block patients from entering while we worked. As we cleaned, we had to keep an eye on the cart to make sure no one approached and grabbed anything off it. A few years earlier, a patient had tried to drink cleaning chemicals from another housekeeper's cart, so we were always on edge about that. The third procedure dealt with what to do if a patient cornered or attacked you. This was rare, but it had happened before. We weren't allowed to defend ourselves physically. If it came to that, we were supposed to yell for a security guard, doctor, or nurse. If that didn't work, we had to try to talk the patient down or find a way to escape without using force. Thankfully, I was never attacked, but the job was unsettling, and working there was one of the hardest things I've ever done. During my first week, there was a woman who refused to put her clothes on. They locked her in solitary confinement for 3 days because of it. The confinement rooms were down a short hallway, behind large glass doors. They'd take disruptive patients there and strap them to padded reclining chairs until the issue was resolved. There were cameras to monitor the rooms, but because of the woman's nudity, they kept a sticky note over the screen, lifting it occasionally to check on her. But the patient who unnerved me the most was there the entire time I worked in Section A. He would talk to himself, which was common for many patients. He often sat in the common area, and sometimes when I was cleaning nearby, I'd be behind the chair he was sitting in. He'd face an empty chair, talking to no one in particular. And then out of nowhere, he'd let out a strained laugh and scream, "Shut up, pig," before calming down again. I'd hurry away because it freaked me out. Another day, the same man was humming a Christian song, like something you'd learn in Sunday school. He was lying down, and then he suddenly went stiff as a board and started screaming. I was mopping nearby, and it startled me. I glanced over and heard him yell, "Stop it, Satan!" before I left the area. I was never hurt, attacked, or cornered by any patients, and I thank God for that. But working in that place was spooky, and I was so grateful when my boss finally told me I'd never have to go back down there again. This happened a few months ago when I was really struggling with my mental health. I was seeing doctors and counselors for depression and self-harm. I was cutting deeply and felt completely miserable. One night, around 2 a.m., while everyone was asleep, I slipped out of the house. I moved carefully to the front, making sure not to wake my parents or my 2 dogs, Arthur and Tyson. It was around Christmas time, and living in England, the snow always came late. But feeling suicidal, I didn't care. I ran down our long, empty road. It looked like an airport runway, heading for a nearby bridge with the intention of jumping to end it all. When I got to the bridge and climbed over the railings, I nearly slipped because they were iced over. I looked down at a 100-foot drop, nothing but darkness below. By then, my parents had noticed I was gone. They checked my room, saw I wasn't there, and reported me missing. They told the police everything about my illness and what I was going through. Later that night, I was admitted to a mental health unit in Nottingham. They placed me on a Section 3, meaning I couldn't leave the building for 6 months. I was already furious that I hadn't jumped, and now I was stuck in a hospital ward with 11 other sick patients. After being led down the corridor of my room, I tried to run, even though I knew the unit was locked down with nowhere to go. Eventually, I fell asleep, watched by 2 staff members. A few days earlier, they'd put me on medication that caused strange side effects, vivid dreams, and nightmares. One night, I had a messed up dream where I was slicing my own body with a meat knife, almost like I was someone else who didn't care about anything. When I woke up in the morning, I was shaken but brushed it off. I got out of bed and went to the room where they gave out meds and checked our blood pressure, waiting for my turn. Then one of the patients, Dane, walked up to me and said something that made my blood run cold. "I'd like to put your knife. Try a sword next time." I mumbled, "Okay," thinking he was making some weird joke I didn't get. He walked off, sat in a chair across from me, and gave me this creepy, clown-like stare. I felt sick. A moment later, he came back with a piece of paper and placed it on the seat next to me, saying, "It's for you. Sleep well." I opened it and saw a drawer of a man sliced open, with another man laughing, holding a big butcher knife. The staff around me grabbed the paper and pocketed it. I figured Dane was just ill, so I tried to forget it. That night, I woke up needing the bathroom. I told the staff, and they took me down the hall since I was allowed in a room alone in case I tried something. When I opened the door, I collapsed on the floor, crying. There was Dane. He'd cut his throat with a razor. The staff yanked their panic tag, setting off an alarm to call for help. They picked him up and tried to save him while he lay there, lifeless. The next morning, they packed his things. I didn't know if he'd been moved to a more secure ward or if he died. I never asked. I just cried, haunted by what I'd seen. A few months later, though, Dane was admitted again. Miraculously, he'd survived that night. When he knocked on my door, I was shocked. "Dane," I said, I thought you were gone." He whispered, "No, apparently I was lucky." Then he leaned in and said, "You made me do this. You'll die and pay." He flashed that same messed up, clown-like smile and walked off to his old room. I fell asleep uneasily that night, but I was woken up by him trying to strangle me. I was choking, spitting, gasping for air while he laughed, saying, "Yeah, you made me do it. You'll take him with you." I was panicking, but eventually some nurses rushed in and pulled him off me. They took him away, and I never heard about him again. I didn't talk to another patient for 4 months after that. Then I was discharged. I've prayed every night since that day that Dane got better. I've worked hard on my mental health. I'm at the gym 6 days a week now. I have a job, and I'm living a pretty good life. But what happened in that unit still haunts me, and I hope I never see or run into him again. This is a story about how I ended up trapped in a mental hospital over 1,100 miles from home. It's a long, complicated tale, so please bear with me. During my first semester of college, I lived in the campus dorms with one roommate. I'd left my family in the southern United States and moved west to Arizona. My roommate, who I'll call Chase, was a quiet, small guy with long, stringy hair covering his face. At first, we seemed to share interests, and I was hopeful we'd become good friends. But as time went on, his bitter, pessimistic attitude started to show. I probably should have expected to feel out of place at a school filled mostly with straight male programmers and nerds. I was an 18-year-old gay artist, after all. But out of place doesn't even begin to describe how the other students saw me. They viewed my friendliness and optimism as ignorance. Chase, in particular, seemed to think my approach to life and people was just blissful stupidity. Maybe that's why he started getting increasingly hostile toward me. He'd tell me I deserved to be set on fire for things as petty as my taste in movies or my computer preferences. One day, while he was in the shower, I noticed some files left open on his computer. They were drawings of father-child pornography. I know I was being nosy, but I didn't say anything at the time. I honestly didn't know what to do with that discovery. Still, knowing he was into something so disturbing made me uneasy. During one of his random outbursts, I let slip what I'd seen in front of our friends. He looked shaken, clearly upset that I'd called him out publicly. A few days later, he moved out of the dorms. At first, I didn't pay much attention to Chase bad-mouthing me. But then an upperclassman, who I'll call Jeff, came into the picture. Jeff was a tall, thin guy I'd often see rollerblading around campus. We'd chat occasionally about rollerblading or Arizona. Even though I knew he was friends with Chase, I didn't think much of it. I wasn't going to judge someone based on who they hung out with. That was my first big mistake. About a week into my second semester, I started noticing Jeff in the dorms more often. Even though he didn't live there and would have needed a key to get in, then he started grabbing me in public. Once, he pinned me against a wall and pressed himself against me. I was too caught off guard to tell him to get lost, and it was humiliating. Jeff began following me more, and Chase would brag about these pranks he convinced Jeff to pull. What started as a minor annoyance turned into full-on sexual harassment. I noticed Chase would often show up right after Jeff had messed with me. The final straw came one day in the school's computer lab. There were plenty of people around, so I didn't expect trouble. But Jeff and Chase showed up. Jeff interrupted a conversation I was having with another student, grabbed my thigh, and started moaning and laughing. Before, his creepy behavior had been more private, but now he had everyone's attention. I tried to laugh it off to hide my embarrassment, saying, "All right, that's enough. Go find someone else to bother." But then he grabbed my crotch and licked my face like some overexcited dog. I shoved him off and stood up. He smirked, muttering homophobic slurs. I'd had enough of this crap. I threw my keyboard at him and spit in his face. He started twitching violently as everyone watched, confused. Then he grabbed my neck and dug his thumbs into my throat. The look in his eyes, it didn't even seem human. Finally, another student shouted, "Get your damn hands off him!" Jeff let go, the wild look fading as he walked over to Chase, and they left the room. I spent the next week talking to the resident advisor about the harassment I'd been enduring for too long. Other students told me they'd seen Jeff waving a knife around campus, bragging about wanting to slit my throat. To my surprise, I wasn't the only one who'd reported him for sexual and physical harassment. But Jeff was one of the school's best programmers, so the faculty mostly turned a blind eye, saying, "Oh, that's just Jeff being weird." I was done with the school and its pathetic excuses for ignoring death threats and assaults. I spoke to the administration one last time. That's when I learned I was being expelled. For spitting on Jeff. "What do you mean? I didn't touch him. He grabbed me, choked me, threatened to kill me." I pleaded with the counselor. She rambled about how Jeff was such a talented student and that I was overreacting. Frustrated, I snapped, "I'd rather bash my head against a wall than deal with the idiots at this school." Suddenly, a police officer walked in, his voice firm. "Okay, son, you've just threatened to harm yourself. You're coming with us." Panicking, I looked back at the counselor, tears in my eyes. She was crying too. The next thing I knew, I was being driven to an industrial-looking building with the letters UPC on the sign. I quickly realized this wasn't a jail or a hospital. It was a holding facility for the mentally ill, made up of just 2 rooms. UPC stood for Urgent Psychiatric Care, but there was nothing caring about it. I was given a plastic-lined reclining chair and a blanket, lined up with dozens of identical chairs in a single room. That's where I'd sit, eat, and sleep for the next 2 weeks. No staff spoke to me for the first 2 days, and I wasn't told what was happening or where I was. I spent those days crying nonstop. By the second day, I started to pull myself together and noticed a range of mental illnesses around me, from people who were just depressed to those who were violently unstable. The first night, an elderly blind woman next to me started vomiting undigested food everywhere. She was left covered in it for half an hour before a nurse, annoyed, finally got off her phone and wheeled her away. Later, I learned the man on my other side was a gang member with obvious burn scars around his neck. There was also a homeless man who wandered around, ranting about the devil. The nurses ignored him, and sometimes I'd hear him laughing at the patients. I woke up several nights to the sound of screaming. For a long time, no one knew where I was. Eventually, I got to use a phone and explained everything to my parents. Toward the end of my stay, I'd almost gotten used to being woken by screams and could fall back asleep fairly easily. I wore the same clothes the whole time, stuck in that chair, mocked by rude nurses like I was some zoo animal. I probably smelled awful too. I was too scared to shower in public, especially after what happened with Jeff. On one of my last days there, I saw the homeless man pull down his pants and start masturbating in another patient's face. The nurses tackled him, and soon after, I was transferred to an actual hospital. Things were surprisingly calm there. I could shower, talk to staff, and read for the next month while doctors worked to balance my antidepressants. After a month, a judge ruled I wasn't a danger to myself or others, and just like that, I was released. I drove back east to be with my family. Over the next week, I got emails and calls from several people. The head of the Student Alliance told me Jeff and Chase were facing backlash from other students, and they were starting an anti-bullying campaign. The school president called to apologize for the incident and offered a refund for my unfinished semester. But the counselor and administration also called, warning they'd sue if I told anyone about what happened. For a year, I stayed silent. I still haven't told my family about the sexual harassment. 3 years later, I'm finally moving on. A few months back, I thought I saw Chase at a local convention, running an artist table. He didn't notice me, but he had the same stringy hair and miserable expression I remember so clearly. Seeing him doesn't bother me anymore, though. In the end, I learned a lot about people, and that sometimes the ones we're forced to trust the most don't deserve it at all. This story might sound like your typical creepy psych ward tale, but to this day, I've never met anyone like this patient. I hope I never do again. I'll admit I've struggled with mental illness my whole life, and have been admitted to several psychiatric hospitals over the years. But I'm not the scary one in this story. There's a lot of stigma around mental illness. And despite what many think, most people with psychological issues aren't dangerous. The man I'm about to tell you about, though, was an exception. I've managed to stay out of hospital for years now, but in my early 20s, I had a breakdown and became deeply suicidal. I won't get into why, but let's just say I've been through a lot of trauma. Maybe stories for another time. I ended up being carried, yes, carried, by a very large, very patient police officer into the ER after I let slip to my doctor that I wanted to end it all. I'm only 5 feet tall and about 98 pounds, so he scooped me up easily. The ward they transferred me to was a textbook psychiatric unit. For some reason I'll never understand, they make most psych wards cold, bright white, with hard floors and mattresses that feel like concrete slabs. The food was awful, which didn't exactly help with feeling less suicidal. There wasn't much to do except watch cable TV or play cards with other patients. Luckily, I connected with a lot of them, especially a guy named Michael. Maybe it was because we were both fiery redheads. Gingers tend to bond over the flack we get for our hair. All the redheads I've known have been a bit wild, but that's probably just a coincidence, right? Anyway, Michael and I were playing a card game called Speed when we heard a nurse say a new patient was coming in. Curious, we both peeked down the hall to see who it was. It's worth noting that, unfortunately, they don't always separate the more disturbed patients from those who are nonviolent. They just lump everyone together in one big crazy pile. I try not to dwell on the potential horrors of that approach. Not all hospitals or staff are so careless. Some doctors and nurses genuinely care and treat you with respect. This place wasn't one of them, though when I looked down the hallway, my heart sank. The new patient's appearance was as unsettling as the pure hatred in his eyes, glaring at everyone around him. He had long, greasy black hair that fell just past his shoulders. He was painfully thin everywhere except his stomach, which stuck out so much he looked 7 months pregnant. I swear he was a man, though the most striking thing about him was his claw-like nails, painted bright blue. His eyes were an icy blue too, sharp enough to cut through you. His hospital gown barely clung to his skeletal frame. I tried to make sense of him, but there was no way. Even at 20, I'd seen plenty of troubled people, but this guy was by far the creepiest. Even Walmart shoppers would have stopped and stared. I glanced at Michael, and I could tell he was rattled too. We'd been there a few days and knew this hospital barely supervised its patients. This guy was about to be let loose among us. I know you shouldn't judge by appearances, but his behavior over the next few days didn't help. He spent most of his time wandering the halls, dragging one of those freaky blue nails along the stairwell walls. You're probably wondering why they didn't make him cut his nails, since they could obviously be used as a weapon. Well, he'd lose it completely whenever they tried, and this hospital just didn't care enough to deal with it. When he wasn't scraping the walls, he'd sit and stare at the rest of us with a hungry, disturbing look. He didn't talk, just stared, plucking his nails against the arm of his chair. He'd also wander into other patients' rooms, stand in the middle, and wait for someone to come in. When they did, he'd lock eyes with them, press a bony finger to his lips to silence them, and then lunge forward. It was straight out of a horror movie, but I swear it was real. I've learned reality can be scarier than anything Hollywood dreams up. I did my best to avoid him, but one day, I drew attention to myself. This ward had an old piano in the main room for patients to mess around with. I'm a musician by trade, mostly a singer, but I can play some decently complex piano pieces. We were all bored and miserable, so I thought music might be more healing than TV. One day, I decided to give the dusty piano a try. Everyone was shocked when I started playing and singing a lullaby I'd written. I guess I hadn't mentioned I could play, so it caught them off guard. For the first time in a while, I felt happy seeing how much the other patients and even the nurses enjoyed it. They begged me to play everything I knew, and I happily kept going. The downside? When I finished, I noticed Mr. Blue Nails staring at me intently. I'd become his new focus. I tried to shake it off, but I started keeping track of where he was, which turned out to be a good thing. Later that night, I went to my room to use the bathroom. When I opened the door, there he was, standing right in my face. Instead of his usual finger-to-lips gesture, he did something worse. He spoke. His voice was as unstable as the rest of him, a low, creepy whisper. Nope. Yep. Just no, no, no. Being tiny isn't just good for getting picked up. It also makes you quick. As he came at me, I ducked under his arms and bolted from the room. I ran straight to Michael and freaked out for a minute. I told the nurses, and they just said he doesn't understand boundaries. I snapped back that, yeah, no kidding, he was pouncing on everyone like a jungle cat, and they needed to watch him closer. I know I should have been more empathetic, given my own mental health struggles, but I grew up in a tough environment. I can tell the difference between someone who's clueless and someone with real menace in their eyes. Thankfully, just a day later, he was transferred to the state hospital. He'd flipped out about taking his meds and tried to stab a nurse with a syringe. You can't refuse meds in a psych ward. If you don't cooperate, they'll pin you down and inject you. He didn't like that. I was released a day after he left, and I don't know what happened to Mr. Blue Nails. I've wondered about him sometimes, though it's been years since then, and I'm doing much better now. I've been hospitalized again, but I've never met another patient quite like him. I used to intern at a psychiatric hospital in California a couple of years ago. I have plenty of stories from that time, but I'll start with this one. I was studying psychology in school and found a hospital with a great program to further my training. I just finished orientation and was set to start my first day. I was nervous but thrilled. I love psychology and working with people. They assigned me to Unit 210, a ward for 15 patients with borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder, or schizophrenia. I unlocked the door to the unit and was immediately met by a couple of patients pacing the long hallway. My first greeting came from a man who shouted that he was going to rape and decapitate me. I'm not exactly intimidating. a 5-foot petite part Asian woman who probably looked out of place. I had to brush it off and act unfazed. "No, you won't," I said. The walls were covered in illegible scribbles and pentagrams. The air smelled of urine, and I could hear screaming down the hall. The patients' rooms had small peephole windows, bare white walls, plain white beds, and no outside windows. The psychologist I was shadowing introduced me to the patients and nurses I'd be working with. One girl, let's call her Katie, came up to say hi and started chatting with me. Naively, I assumed she was another intern or volunteer. She was in regular clothes and seemed normal. I asked if she was an intern too. Rookie mistake. I should have checked for a badge, which all staff wore. She smiled, looked me straight in the eyes, and said, "Yes." I told her I was excited to work with her. A few minutes later, the psychologist, Mary, told me to gather the patients for their art group. I asked if I could get Katie to help round everyone up. Mary said, "Of course. You'll also be working closely with Katie. Read her file after art group." I thought, file? When art group started, there was Katie, a patient. I later read her file. She had schizophrenia and a long history of pathological lying. When Mary said I'd work closely with her, she meant I'd be shadowing Katie one-on-one, tracking her progress every day I was there. My job was to make sure she did her chores, made her bed, kept her room tidy, maintained hygiene, attended groups, and completed assignments. Aside from lying about being an intern, Katie seemed really nice and sweet. During art group, as we painted, she shared bits of her life story, and we laughed together. She said, "Belle, I'm glad you're here. I've always wanted a sister and a friend. We even kind of look alike. I'm going to draw you." For the first couple of weeks, everything went smoothly. One Tuesday, I came to get Katie for her math lesson. I knocked on her door, and she popped out, excited. I stepped back, eyes wide. Her long, waist-length black hair had been cut into an A-line, just like mine. "I had staff cut my hair to match your style," she said. "Now we really look like sisters." I didn't know what to say but managed. "Looks good, Katie." Things started to shift after that. Katie's mood and personality became unpredictable. She began telling me stories about us as kids. "Belle, remember that time in kindergarten when we got in trouble together? It's crazy, Belle. We've been friends forever." I'd try to steer the conversation elsewhere, but she'd say, "You still have that bad memory from when you were little. You're so silly." She got clingy, even jealous when I spoke to other patients. She'd tell them things like, "Stay away from Belle today. She has mono," or "Belle can't talk this week. She has laryngitis." The worst was when she said, "Belle doesn't like you," which led patients to confront me about why I supposedly had a problem with them. One day, I peeked into her room to check if her bed was made. She was sitting on it, staring intensely at the wall. I looked closer. My name was scrawled all over the walls. I reported it to staff right away, and they cleaned it up later, but they brushed it off, saying, "I just didn't want to forget you when you're not here. They can wash you off the walls, but they can't wash you out of my mind." Katie finally crossed the line when she found out I'd be tutoring another patient, Chris. She was furious and turned nasty. She had staff and patients calling her Belle. I explained that we still work together, but she snarled, "You're not Belle anymore. I am. I'll erase you. Go screw Chris. You'll lose your mind before you leave here." A week or two passed without incident. I just finished my shift and was heading home for Thanksgiving weekend. As I walked down the empty hallway out of the unit, Katie jumped out of nowhere and shoved me into a room that was supposed to be locked. It was one of those bare rooms. White walls, white bed, small peephole window. I hit the cold floor and scrambled for the door, but she was on the other side, pulling it shut. She screamed that I'd never leave and she'd make sure of it. "Go lie in the bed. It's your bed now." I hit the emergency button on my keys to trigger the unit's alarm, but nothing happened. Broken alarm, unlocked doors. Just my luck. I yelled for her to let go, but she refused, shouting that I was the crazy one who belonged in there. Where were the staff? We fought over the door for what felt like hours. Then Chris, my math student, came to my rescue. He pushed Katie aside, freeing the door so I could get out. The alarm finally went off, and staff came running. I was shaken, but Katie had to be dragged away, screaming, "I'll get rid of you, Belle. I'll wear your skin if I have to. I'll be you soon and you'll be gone." Katie was transferred to another hospital the next day. Things quieted down, and a couple of days later, I was stripping her bed to prepare for the next patient. As I pulled off the pillowcase, a folded piece of paper and an eraser fell out. It was a graphite drawing of me from that first art group, one I'd never seen before. There was eraser residue on it, and one side of my face was smudged. She'd started to erase me. This happened back in the early 80s when I was just a kid, maybe 5 or 6 years old. I was never afraid of the dark, not like other kids seemed to be. It didn't bother me at all, probably because I grew up pretty sheltered. I went to a private Catholic school in a small town, and I don't recall anyone talking about spooky things that go bump in the night. Even on Halloween, I'd dress up as something cute, like a crayon or a pumpkin, nothing scary. So, one night when I woke up thirsty, I tossed and turned for a bit, but finally dragged myself out of bed. I didn't turn on any lights, just used the moonlight to guide me so I wouldn't wake my sister. I tiptoed downstairs as quietly as I could and headed into the kitchen. The kitchen was right around the corner from the stairs. It had windows on 2 sides, one above the sink and another above the kitchen table, which sat next to the back door. That night, the moonlight was streaming in, casting a glow across the table and onto the floor in front of me. The light stopped short of the sink, but it was angled in a way that I had to cross through it to get there, and I'd have to cross it again to head back upstairs. I filled a glass with water and stood at the sink, gulping it down in big sips, when I heard a noise. It sounded like someone was on the back porch. I froze, quickly set my glass down and turned around. In the window, I saw a shadowy figure. It was way too late for visitors. Panicked, I crouched down in the darkness under the sink to hide. That's when I heard it, a loud crash of glass breaking. Shards from the window scattered across the floor. I saw a hand reaching through to unlock the door. My heart was racing, and all I could think about was finding a better hiding spot. I couldn't run back upstairs without being seen in the moonlight streaming through the window. The only other option was a laundry room in the opposite direction. I bolted for it, squeezing myself behind the washing machine. Somehow, in the midst of all that fear, I managed to fall asleep there. The next thing I knew, my mom and cousin were shouting my name, their voices frantic. They found me curled up behind the washing machine. My mom scooped me up, carried me to an old rocking chair, and held me so tightly it felt like forever. She never brought up the incident again, and as time passed, I started to question whether it even happened. Memories can be so unreliable when you're young. But something had scared me enough that I began sleeping with my light on every night. Fast forward about 20 years. My grandmother, one of my favorite people in the world, had just passed away. I flew home for a funeral, feeling heartbroken. If you've ever been to a visitation, you know how it goes. The close family lines up next to the casket, and everyone who attends walks by to offer handshakes and condolences. That day, people shared stories about my grandma, some about my dad too. He died when I was around 2. I was told his visitation had been in the same room. It was all bittersweet, hearing those memories. Then this woman approached, someone I'd never met before. At first, nothing seemed off. She was chatting and laughing with my aunts, speaking kindly to my cousins. But when she reached me, her smile vanished completely. She gave me a cold look, turned, and walked away without even a simple, "I'm sorry for your loss." Honestly, the way she stared made me feel like I'd done something to offend her. A little while later, a friend pulled me aside and said she'd overheard a woman saying some unsettling things about me. It was the same woman. Apparently, she knew everything about me and my sister, intimate details, things even my friend didn't know. It was bizarre. A few hours later, I was in a parking lot with my mom, picking up snacks, when she finally opened up about it. She told me the woman was my father's ex-girlfriend. This ex had always believed she was the one meant to marry my dad and have his kids. She felt my mom had stolen him from her. It was classic stalker behavior. Mom revealed that this woman had once planned to kidnap me and my sister and run off with us. But something went wrong, and she was caught. My mom, feeling pity for her, never pressed charges. She'd even convinced my aunts to believe the woman's side of the story. And since my dad was gone, he couldn't set things straight. Mom admitted she didn't have the heart to expose the woman's lies to my aunts. Knowing how lonely and obsessed she was with this imagined relationship, that's when it clicked. That night in the kitchen, when I was a kid, it was her breaking in. If I hadn't woken up thirsty, if I hadn't hidden behind the washing machine, she might have taken me. I was a heavy sleeper back then, so it would have been easy for her to grab me without much of a fight. The realization sent chills down my spine. But it gets stranger. Throughout my childhood, weird things kept happening, and I'd learned to brush them off. I'd get phone calls when no one spoke, just silence on the other end. It didn't matter how many times I changed my number. The calls always came from random local numbers. When I moved away, it continued. I knew it wasn't telemarketers because the area codes were always from unfamiliar home phones. Sometimes, the calls would come in bursts, several in a row. I'd answer, hear nothing, hang up, and minutes later, it would happen again. Eventually, I'd yell into the phone, and the calls would stop for a while. It became so normal that I stopped thinking much of it, since it had been happening my whole life. Then there were the strangers following me. As a kid, I'd sometimes look out the window and see a car parked nearby, and I could swear someone was inside, just staring at me. I'd walk away, come back later, and they'd still be there, sometimes for hours. It happened at school, at friend houses, at relatives' places. Once, when I was at a neighbor's, someone even walked up to their window and stared at us until we noticed. We screamed. An adult called the police, and they found the plants under the window trampled. But they never caught anyone. I'd always chalked these things up to an overactive imagination. But after my mom told me about my dad's ex, it all started to feel connected. I became much more private after that. I locked down my phone number, added new passwords to my social media, and at the time, I was living in a gated community across the country, so I didn't worry too much about her finding me. It might not be related, but now that I think about it, I haven't gotten a single one of those silent phone calls since my grandmother's funeral. They used to happen so often, and then they just stopped. It's strange to realize how quiet things have been these past few years. If there's a lesson here, I guess it's to listen to your kids. Sometimes, it's not just their imagination running wild. Here's a bit of backstory before I dive in. I'm a 20-year-old woman studying at a university in California. One day, my friends were all out, and I was bored out of my mind. I decided to hop on Omegle, that random chat website. I'd used it before, but always with friends around. This time, being the genius I am, I thought going on the video chat alone would be a brilliant idea. After skipping past a bunch of creepy guys doing inappropriate stuff, I finally connected with a really good-looking guy. He was muscular, probably in his late 20s, and had this accent that instantly made my heart skip a beat. We started talking, but the video kept lagging because of my terrible internet. He asked if he could have my phone number, so we could talk on the phone instead. It seemed a little odd, but I figured it made sense, and, well, he was hot, so I gave him my number. We kept chatting, and I thought he was funny and smart. I asked where he was from, and he named a town just 20 minutes from my school. I got excited and, without thinking, told him what university I went to. He mentioned his cousin went there too, which made it feel like a small world moment. We talked for hours, but some red flags started popping up. He casually mentioned he'd been addicted to drugs in the past, and that he'd once sliced some guy's Achilles tendon because a guy had hurt his sister. Stuff like that came up, but I brushed it off, thinking he was just a troubled guy with a rough past. I mean, standing up for your sister or struggling with addiction doesn't automatically make you a bad person, right? So I kept talking to him. He wanted to meet up that weekend, but I had just gotten out of a bad relationship. So meeting guys wasn't high on my list. I was just enjoying the attention and having fun with our chats. He called me every day, always making me laugh, and I started wondering if I should just go meet him. But something about him still felt off. He'd brag about how wealthy he was, saying his dad owned a bunch of companies. One time, I nearly burst out laughing when he claimed the shortest time he'd ever had sex was 6 hours. Our conversations were mostly light and fun, but then he dropped these heavy, depressing details, like how his brother had died or how his ex-girlfriend had an abortion. I'm not the type to be impressed by money, status, or exaggerated stories, so I found a lot of what he said kind of ridiculous and hard to believe. Still, bored as I kept talking to this guy. Then he mentioned there was a fashion show at my school that Thursday, and that he'd been invited to attend. That struck me as weird because whenever there's an event like that at my university, it's all over Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and I hadn't seen a single post about it. Plus, why would my school invite some random guy who didn't even go here? I thought maybe his cousin's connection explained it, but it still didn't add up. Then, in another conversation, he brought up yet another death. This time, his best friend who died in a car crash. I offered my condolences, and we moved on. He started saying things like how I was such an amazing person, how he'd never met anyone like me, really over-the-top stuff. He even hinted a few times that he was falling in love with me, which I found super creepy, since we'd only been talking for a couple of days. I tried to laugh it off and keep things casual, because I was still having fun. By Wednesday, he'd been asking to meet up nonstop, just like he had the past 3 days. Then out of nowhere, he said he'd spent $27 on me. I was like, what the heck are you talking about? He claimed he'd paid for an app that could track my location and said I lived 10 minutes from campus. I was freaking out, repeating, "You're kidding, right?" Over and over until he finally said he was joking. He also made this weird comment about how he could just show up at my house and kept asking if I believed he'd do it. I told him I did believe him, but begged him not to come, saying I wouldn't let him in. He replied that my roommates probably would, which made my skin crawl. Later that night, he called again, and we had a totally normal conversation, so I stupidly decided to let it slide. Thursday rolled around, and he called me in the morning to say his uncle had died. At this point, he'd mentioned 3 dead people in just a few days, and I was starting to wonder if he was making it all up, or worse, if he was somehow involved. I quickly changed the subject and asked where he'd be on campus for the fashion show. He gave me some vague answer, like, "I'll figure out the location when I get there." I pressed him for details, but his responses were so unclear that I knew he was lying. Oddly, that was the first day he didn't ask to meet up, even though he was supposedly going to be nearby. He also didn't text me at all, which was unusual because he'd been blowing up my phone every day. I tried to focus on my studies since I had midterms the next day. I went to campus with some friends to hit the library. In the middle of our study session, I got a text from him that just said, "And so..." It wasn't threatening on its own, but it gave me the worst gut feeling. I excused myself and called my best friend, who I'd been keeping in the loop about this guy. While I was on the phone with her, he called me. My friend suggested I merge the calls so she could listen in. I wasn't prepared for what he said next, and it still gives me chills. "You didn't tell me you like to go out," he said. I responded, "What are you talking about?" Then he said, "You're not at home right now." I was terrified. First, how did he know I wasn't home? And second, how the heck did he know where I lived? After that call, I immediately contacted the police, But as usual, they said they couldn't do anything since he hadn't directly threatened me. They just told him to send him a message saying, "Please don't talk to me anymore." I did, and he replied, "I'll do whatever makes you happy, but just know I'll never give up." That text still felt threatening, so I told all my roommates to leave for the weekend, and I stayed at a friend's place. Thankfully, it's been about 8 months, and I haven't had any run-ins with him since. But for weeks after the incident, weird things kept happening. Multiple times. Someone would bang on our door or ring the doorbell in the middle of the night. When my roommates and I went to check, no one was there. Once, when one of my roommates was home alone, she heard someone trying to force the door open. Those incidents might have been unrelated, but we got an extra lock installed because it felt like someone was messing with us. Even if it wasn't him, it was enough to keep us on edge. What I'm about to share still haunts me to this day. It's a secret I'd rather take to my grave, but I feel like someone needs to know what's going on out there on the internet. I'm hoping this story can raise some awareness, so it can be looked into properly, because I've tried my best to get it investigated while staying anonymous. That's why I'm telling it here. It needs to be said so others can help put a stop to it. A few years ago, when I was 16, I was bored out of my mind one day and started watching YouTube videos about true deep web experiences. I got really curious about this stuff, fascinated by how there's a much darker side to the internet than most people realize. What creeped me out most were the stories about things like child pornography or some sicko inviting you to a live cam show to watch murders. I tried downloading Tor once to check it out, but I chickened out. I just didn't have the nerve to go through with it. So, you'd think the deep web will be the focus of this story, right? Well, it's not. The real horror happened on Omegle. I'd always use Omegle to kill time, hoping to find someone who shared my interests. But those deep web stories had gotten under my skin, and I started wondering if I could find people talking about really dark stuff, like those creeps who are into little kids or anything related to children. So I went looking for it. At first, I just came across the usual garbage. Guys doing gross stuff on camera, nothing too shocking. But then things took a seriously creepy turn. I started seeing images of girls posing in their underwear, and what completely floored me was this video of a small, dark-skinned Asian girl being abused by a big, hairy guy. I felt sick to my stomach watching it. But for some messed up reason, my curiosity got the better of me, and I kept digging. After skipping through more disgusting videos, I landed on a dark screen. The guy on the other end, who kept his face hidden, typed, "Send to receive." I asked what he meant, but he disconnected right away. That gave me a bad feeling, like something shady was going on. I was scared to even think about what it could be, but I pushed myself to keep going. I typed "send to receive" into the chat, and suddenly I was connected with a bunch of users who used that phrase. They all repeated it like it was some kind of secret code to start trading something, and that's exactly what it was. I pretended I had what they wanted, but told one guy to go first. He sent me a link to a Dropbox folder. When I opened it, it was filled with child pornography, images, and videos. That's when I realized I'd stumbled onto a child pornography exchange network on one of the most notorious chat sites on the internet. What made it worse was that I actually watched one of the videos. I swear I have zero interest in this stuff, but I was trying to understand what was happening, like some kind of amateur investigator. Most of the videos showed kids who seemed to have been groomed or manipulated into thinking what was happening was fun. It was horrifying to see how these kids were being exploited. I couldn't stop thinking about who these predators might be. Fathers, relatives, kidnappers, or maybe creeps who paid to abuse kids in another country. I was disgusted that I'd seen it with my own eyes. Every time I got one of these creeps to send me a link without giving anything back, I reported it. I kept reporting until the links were taken down. I've been doing this for years now, and it's like a never-ending flood. New copies and uploads keep popping up no matter how many I think I've stopped. I've seen so much innocence destroyed, and I often wonder if my reports have ever helped track down the kids in those videos. I have no idea if they're ever rescued. I've learned all the code words these predators use, like S to R or S to R, and I'm terrified it might never end. I expected this kind of thing from the deep web, but it's insane to realize this stuff is happening on a site as open and accessible as Omegle. It's a miracle my brain still functions after everything I've seen. I haven't been so traumatized that I need therapy or anything, but it's pretty messed up when I think about it. Sometimes, I've even trolled these creeps just to mess with them, to make them mad for being attracted to kids who can't even understand what sex is. It makes me feel a bit like those anonymous activists sometimes, doing something to fight back. I even gave myself a code name, Indigo, to feel like some kind of hero, but I'm no hero. The real heroes are the people who work around the clock to process these reports and try to shut this stuff down. They probably have kids of their own and live in fear that something like what's in those images could happen to them. I report so many links in a day that I'm sure I've rattled some of these creeps. Maybe even scarred them a little. Let this be a warning to anyone thinking about going on Omegle to try what I did. Don't click the links. Just copy them and report them to a website that deals with child sexual abuse material. That's all I want. I don't want this to mess up anyone's head or pull them into this awful exchange system. I don't want to inspire people to go after these creeps themselves. I'm just tired of being the only one who knows what's happening on Omegle. But if even one person hears this story and decides to help, I'd respect them for it. Good luck. Maybe they'll take up the name Indigo, or maybe there'll be more of us out there. This story is a tangled one, spanning just under 2 years, starting in 1996. The exact month is blurry, but the year is clear. I just divorced my first wife. The split was friendly enough, but I wasn't ready to jump into anything new anytime soon. I started hanging out again with a friend I'd known since we were about 12. Terry, he and his wife, Amy, had twin boys not quite 2 years old. Their names don't matter much to the story. For a while, it was just typical friend stuff. Grabbing drinks, hitting clubs, watching movies on beaches. DVDs were only just starting to appear. Normal, everyday hangouts. Terry worked odd hours at an institution for people with various issues. I can elaborate if needed, but it's not central to the story, except to note that Terry and his dad were counselors or caretakers there, while his mom, Vanessa, was a janitor, I think. His shifts were usually something like noon to 10, sometimes till midnight. Forgive me if the details are hazy. It's been nearly 18 years. As time went on, I grew closer to their family. I adored the boys, even started thinking of them as my own nephews. They were great kids, though so different from each other. One was outgoing, all smiles and giggles, super social. The other was painfully shy, easily upset. It still amazes me, looking back. By around June 1997, the three of us decided to go clubbing one night. Everything started out great, lots of laughs, everyone having a blast. Then Terry steps away to grab another drink, and Amy tries to tell me something. The music's so loud I can't hear her, so I lean in. She leans in too and says, "I think I'm falling in love with you." I bet you're thinking what I was. Oh, shit. I smiled politely, nodded, and said I was heading to the bathroom, supposedly to take a leak. Instead, I tracked down Terry and said, "We need to talk. Now." I pulled him aside and told him exactly what Amy had said, suggesting they get counseling together. I admitted I was starting to feel something for her too, but I'd been brushing it off. My friendship with both of them was too important to risk. But I'm no saint. I downplayed it to Terry. I was falling hard for Amy, and I knew it was wrong. I hated myself for it. He was my friend, and I felt like I was tearing apart what I thought was a happy marriage. Worse, I wasn't even looking for a relationship. I was still sorting out who I was after my divorce, wrestling with lingering pain from my ex. So there I was, terrified I'd just blown up my friendship with both of them. I'm shy, always have been, even now at 43. I don't make friends easily, and the ones I have are more like family than my actual family. The only reason I was even at that club was because Amy insisted. I despise crowds. What happened next threw me. Terry just nodded, smiled, and thanked me for being honest. He said he'd talked to Amy to sort things out, then admitted their marriage had been rocky for a while. He wasn't sure where it was headed. It didn't erase my guilt, but at least I'd been mostly upfront. We went back to Amy, drinks in hand, and the night carried on like nothing happened. When we got home, Amy was a mess. 14 tequila shots plus who knows how many cocktails. Honestly, thinking back, she must have thrown up at least once at the club. Terry agreed she needed a crash, so we carried her to my couch, set a 5-gallon bucket nearby, and started watching movies. Time passed, and Terry decided to head home to get the kids from his sister. He'd leave Amy with me, and I could bring her over tomorrow. Looking back, that was a terrible idea. After he left, I grabbed a beer, maybe two. I started a movie, then hit the bathroom. Next thing I know, I'm on the other side of the couch, a blanket over me, and I realize with a jolt that I'm buck naked. Amy sees me wake up, chuckles, and says, "Good morning." I'm panicking, thinking, please tell me I grabbed this blanket myself. I try to piece it together. I went to the bathroom. She must have read my mind because she looks me dead in the eye and says, "Nope, I found you passed out, totally nude." Then she gets serious. I meant what I said last night. I think I'm falling in love. "Amy, we can't," I said. "I told Terry what you said. You're married to one of my closest friends. I won't lie, I feel the same way. But we can't do this." I braced for a fight, expecting her to lose it for me ratting her out to Terry. I thought, this is it. I'm losing one friend, maybe both. She could make sure I never see him again. But that's not what happened. "That's why I'm falling for you," she said. "You're honest." I cringed inside. I expected you to tell him. But if he was so worried, why the hell did he leave me here? I had no answer. To make a long story short, things spiraled. Terry refused counseling, and Amy started confiding in me about all sorts of issues. Why she was growing to resent him, and more. Eventually, they split, but kept living together for the kids. They had separate bedrooms. When Terry was at work, Amy stayed home with the boys. When he got back around 10, she'd leave and crash at my place. I won't pretend I'm blameless. If I'd been stronger, maybe they'd still be together. Maybe she'd still be alive. It's one more reason I blame myself for nearly 20 years. Things escalated. Terry's mom, Vanessa, once told me when I was about 18, "Everyone thinks I'm this sweet little lady, but when I'm pissed off, I turn nasty." Prophetic words, let me tell you. Back then, I laughed it off. I'd known her almost as long as Terry, and I'd never seen that side. She was maybe 5'3", 100 pounds, soaking wet, mousy looking. But as I got older, I learned more about her. Her extreme views on women who wore makeup, dresses, or had sex for any reason other than making babies, even with their husbands. I ended up calling her batshit crazy. More on that soon. Though I only witnessed one event myself, Amy told me plenty before she died. Because of their marital problems, Vanessa insisted Terry and Amy move into a trailer right next to her families. She thought it'd fix everything. Amy hated the idea for a bunch of reasons. It was in the middle of nowhere in Washington state. She despised Vanessa until a couple years earlier. The place didn't even have electricity. Her nearest relative was 30 to 40 minutes away in an emergency, and Amy loathed nature. She grew up near Philadelphia. Her dad was ex-Army. She was used to cities, military bases, civilization, not the sticks. This place was at the end of a 1.5-mile gravel road, one way in or out. At night, it was pitch black unless the sky was clear. On those rare cloudless nights, you could see the Milky Way, countless stars, even the aurora borealis sometimes. If you ever get the chance, go camping in western Washington. So, Amy moved the trailer. She hated it, but the rent was half what they paid close to town. Things with Terry kept getting worse. Amy caught him in lie after lie, small stuff, but she didn't take dishonesty well, and neither do I. By February 1997, they'd separated as a couple, but stayed under the same roof for the boys. Amy started telling me what was happening. They argued more and more. Terry's lies piled up. Vanessa was breaking into the trailer, searching it, threatening Amy, calling her names, everything from slut to worse. Vanessa told her the trailer was hers to enter as she pleased and that the boys were her kids, warning Amy to watch her back because she'd make sure Amy was out of the way. None of this held up in court. Pure hearsay, since I didn't see it myself. Terry was getting more unstable, even hitting Amy at one point. Vanessa started peeking in windows at all hours, once walking into Amy's bedroom while she was showering, and watching her until Amy noticed. Amy tore into her, threatening to meet her with a baseball bat and call the cops for trespassing if she ever did it again. Amy's car kept accidentally running over nails. Her keys went missing, and things only got worse. By April, Terry was gone for a few days. Don't remember why. My apartment didn't have a washer or dryer, just a coin-op laundry room with zero security. Amy invited me out to the trailer to do laundry and hang out. I jumped at the chance to see the boys and spend time with the woman I loved. Around 11 at night, there's a pounding on the door. It's Vanessa. She and Amy go at it verbally. Vanessa's screaming, calling Amy a whore and a bitch, demanding she handle the boys because they're hers and Amy has no business near them. Keep in mind, I'm just doing laundry, drinking coffee, and we're watching some comedy movie. I don't recall which, but we were laughing. Vanessa tries to push past Amy to grab one of the boys, but Amy's quicker, stronger. She scoops up a kid and tells Vanessa to get her ass off the doorstep, or she's calling cops. Vanessa's so mad she's stuttering, spitting with rage. Then she spots me and turns her venom on me, at one point calling me a yuppie. I still laugh thinking about it. I looked at her, grinned, and said, "What the hell's a yuppie?" That must have been the last straw, because she stormed off. 20 minutes later, Amy's on the phone with her mom, half laughing, half furious about it. I'm switching laundry loads when the doorbell rings again. I roll my eyes, thinking, here we go. Amy tells her mom to hold on, setting the phone down so her mom can hear what's coming. Amy opens the door and Steve, Terry's dad, bursts in like a hurricane. He grabs Amy by the throat. When he sees me, he throws her to the floor and charges, grabbing my shoulders. I grab his arms and say, "Steve, you better think real hard about whether you want to do this. I'll finish whatever you start." His rage melts away. He blinks, confused, looks at Amy clutching her throat, yelling to her mom to call 911. He turns back to me and in a small voice says, "What's going on here?" I say, "Steve, I'm doing laundry." He mutters, "But you're dressed." I'm like, "Yeah, Steve, that's how you do laundry." He looks at Amy again, but she's dressed. I repeat, "Steve, we're doing laundry, drinking coffee, talking." He mumbles to himself, "Oh, the cops were called, and Steve was arrested for domestic violence. Simple battery, I think." In all the years I'd known him, I'd never seen Steve act aggressive, let alone violent. I was stunned, which is why I tried talking him down first. That wasn't the Steve I knew. From what I pieced together later, here's what likely happened. Vanessa had her fight with Amy, tried insulting me, got laughed off, and went back to her trailer, maybe 300 feet away. She spun some twisted story to Steve, something so vile it pushed him over the edge to defend his wife and son's honor. I'm guessing, but with his "you're dressed" comments, he probably thought Amy and I were hooking up. Once he realized he'd been lied to, it hit him. He spent the weekend in jail, and Vanessa let him rot there, even made him walk home for not finishing the job. Steve was barred from the property when Amy was there. Things kept getting worse. Amy's stuff was damaged or stolen. Only her things. Underwear, clothes, jewelry, one earring, jumper cables, flattened tires. She got creepy calls, dead air, heavy breathing, sometimes threats. She started recording her talks with Terry. I was paranoid, begging her to take the boys and leave. The trailer situation was a mess. Power cut out randomly. Water stopped despite being on a well. Amy kept saying everything was fine, that Terry wouldn't touch her, that Vanessa was scared of her. I wasn't convinced. July 4th. The boys turned 3. Terry took the day off but wasn't around. Maybe out of town, I'm not sure. Amy and I took the boys to see fireworks. It was a great time, but I kept pleading with her to leave. I didn't care where. Stay with me. Get a 2-bedroom apartment. Go to her mom's. Head to Arizona to my dad's, and I'd follow. I just knew something bad was coming. She brushed it off, saying it'd be okay. I later learned her mom was also pushing her to get out, sensing something was wrong too. July 17th, Amy came to my place as usual, upset. She and Terry had another fight. She mentioned Vanessa sticking her nose in again, threatening her, calling her a bitch. I could tell she'd been crying. I begged her again to leave, for her, for the kids. I held her, and we fell asleep in each other's arms. I'd never felt better. July 18th, around noon, 2 weeks after the boy's birthday, Amy finally agreed. After Terry left for work, she'd pack up the boys and head to her parents' place. She was done. She kissed me softly, said she loved me, and promised to call later so we could plan our future. I walked her to her car. We kissed again, and I told her I loved her, to be careful. She smiled, said she'd see me soon. I went inside. She drove off to get the boys. I fell asleep, but my dreams were uneasy. By 10 p.m., nothing. Midnight, still nothing. I was freaking out. No call, no word. I tried calming myself. She's probably just catching up with her parents. She told me not to worry. July 19th, around 1 a.m., my phone rings. It's her parents' number. Relief washes over me. I pick up and say, "Hey, my love, what took you so long?" But it's not her. It's her dad, Frank. "Is this Adam?" he asks. I say yes. "Adam, this is Amy's father. Have you seen Amy lately?" I tell him she left my place around noon yesterday, and I was waiting for her call from their house. He pauses. "Adam, there's been a problem." "What problem?" I ask, my stomach tightening. "The police are at Amy's house." "Why?" "I already know, but he hasn't said it. There's been an event." "No." "Adam, Amy's been shot." "No." "Yes, Adam, it's happened. The police are there now." "Is she okay?" "Tell me she's okay." He's choking up. "Adam, I'm so sorry. They're telling me she's dead. My baby girl, she's dead." He breaks down. I'm wrecking my apartment, screaming I'll kill whoever did this. Frank tries to calm me. "Adam, stay home. Don't go out there. Let the police handle it. Do you understand?" I'm loading my .357, saying I'll be ready if that bastard shows up. Frank begs me not to do anything stupid. I agree, but only because he's asking. I failed her. I knew this was coming. I'd been begging her to leave, and she finally agreed yesterday. If I convinced her just 1 day sooner. I called my mom around 2 a.m., told her everything. They were at my place in 20 minutes. The last clear thought I had for a long time was handing my gun to my mom to keep until I was stable. Around 5:30 a.m., there's a knock. I check the peephole. 2 men, not Terry. I open the door. They flash badges, detectives on Amy's case. We're looking for Adam. I say I was expecting them, that Frank and Amy's mom called me. They notice I've been crying. Rare for me, and see the state of my apartment. They ask to see my gun. I nod, and Mom hands it over. They check it, ask why it's got only 5 bullets. That's how my dad gave it to me. I say, they ask if I have other guns, smaller ones. I say no, just a .357, and it stays home. They search my place, see the mess, and say, "This hit you hard. You obviously loved her." I snap, "Gee, what was your first clue?" They ask when I was last at the trailer, check my car, pull 6 months of chat logs from my computer. After an hour, they take me to the station for an interview. By 9:30 or 10 a.m., I'm back home. Mom tried cleaning up, but the cops left me to my grief. 18 years later, the pain's still there. Logically, I know I'd probably be dead if I was there, but that voice in my head says I failed her. Therapy helped me live, but the damage is permanent. I think of her every day, wondering what I could have done differently. If one day sooner would have saved her. Terry and Vanessa were arrested, tried, and convicted. The first trial got tossed on technicalities, but before retrial, they took plea deals. Vanessa admitted to assault, conspiracy, and, sick as it is, defiling Amy's body. Terry copped a second-degree murder and conspiracy. Every July 18th is hell for me. The boys are 21 now, with no memory of their mom. Vanessa's out. Terry's still locked up. I want Amy's story shared, not for attention, but to warn others. Maybe it'll save someone from the same fate. Survivors never fully heal, but you have to keep going. That hole, it stays with you forever.